you so much. Now, perfect. I was just going to ask about that. Awesome. Okay. So hi, everyone. Thanks for being here, especially like right before the holidays. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing this, but this is my last week of work. And then I'm going to have 2 weeks off, which I'm very excited about. So I hope others of you are able to do that as well. Yeah, we deserve that time. Exactly. All right. So today we're going to talk about serving survivors with mental health disabilities. And I'm going to share my screen and go through a PowerPoint. And I'm going to talk about first, kind of like why it's hard for people to disclose mental health disabilities. And then I'm going to talk about things that you can do, like really, really specific guidance, what you can do to help people, like kind of, you know, to just give you some ideas of other things that you can do to help out. So I have some questions that I'm going to ask, and I'll just have you enter those into the chat. I also know that a lot of you have done, like, as I talk about it, you'll probably find yourself in some of the work that you've done with survivors. So I really encourage you to add any strategies that you've used in the chat. One of the best things about these webinars, from my perspective, is that I learn a lot from you all. And I think a lot of times what I'm doing is kind of validating what you know, and maybe just kind of expanding it a little bit. So I really encourage you to enter, like when we get to that part, enter ideas, ways in which you've dealt with, you've helped survivors with mental health disabilities. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and gotta find the right slide. Here we go. Okay, so you see the one slide, right? Okay, awesome, cool. I have 2 monitors. So on one monitor, I have the next slide plus my notes plus all the slides that are coming up. So I want to make sure I'm not sharing that one. Okay, so a lot of you, if you've been in some of the webinars that I have been doing, you know that I have dissociative identity disorder, and that used to be known as multiple personality disorder. And it impacts the way that I learn, I interact with others. And so I'm going to bring some of that information, not as much because I've done quite a few for you all, and you have those recordings, but I'm going to still bring that into this presentation, this webinar. But just so you know, the things that help someone like me is pretty universal. And so those are the same kinds of things that help other people with psychiatric disabilities. So, so I'll go through all that, but of course, if you have any questions at all, please, please, please enter them into the chat so that we can kind of, you know, go through them all. So again, my name is Olga Trujillo. My pronouns are they, them. I live in Star Prairie, Wisconsin, which is about an hour outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. It's cold here. Which is what it's supposed to be like. It's snowy, which is what it's supposed to be like. Yesterday, it was a high of 54, and all the snow that we had gotten in the past week or so had melted, and I was very sad about that. So that's kind of how strange I am, is how much I like the cold and the snow. Okay, so the goals for our webinars, we're going to explore the challenges that survivors who have mental health disabilities face accessing safety and healing services. we're going to examine the complexities that mental health disabilities can present. And then we're going to strategize about things that you can do to help. So let's kind of frame what we're talking about. So what we know in the United States have a mental health disability. I think the number is much higher than that, just really honestly, because there's a lot of people that have mental health issues that are never diagnosed. They've just kind of learned to live with them. So I think it's just a lot higher, but what we know is at least 51.5 million people. So that's a lot. And that means that you're coming in contact with people with mental health disabilities, whether you know it or not. And then 80% of women who have experienced rape, stalking, or physical violence by an intimate partner have reported either significant short-term or long-term effects. So PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder. So what that does is that it basically, abuse makes the mental health disabilities even harder. So it can add mental health challenges, and it also can flare up mental health challenges. So for example, I have dissociative identity disorder, and I've been moving through the world as if I've been one for 30 years. But if I experience trauma or a big loss, I am likely to unravel, to struggle, and to have new symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder. So even though I've done a tremendous amount of work there, I have what I consider to be a fragile mental health situation that I just tend to all the time. So in one study, about 20% of survivors of domestic or sexual violence have reported experiencing a new onset of psychiatric disorders. And that's, again, a lot of times it's PTSD that people are experiencing added to what they're already challenged with. Okay, so here's my question to you. One of the first questions I have for you in the chat. So have you worked with a survivor that had a mental health disability? So if you could just put yes, no, or I don't know into the chat, that'd be awesome. Thanks, Rita. Thanks, Leah. Thanks. I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Yadira. And Megan, thank you. Okay, Jessica, you're not sure if you have. I bet you have, but we're going to find out. So most everybody knows they have. And Jessica, I bet you have. And you'll kind of know as we go through. But totally. Okay, awesome. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so here's the next thing. So for people who know that they have, how did you know that the survivor you worked with had a mental health disability? So here's what I want to know. Did they tell you? So did they disclose? Or did someone else tell you through the referral process? Or was it something that you noticed? And Jessica, you can jump in too. I was just, because you said, I don't know, I didn't want to like push you to say more about that. Cool. And by the way, I forgot to warn you all, I have 2 dogs in here with me, and I can't really kick them out because one of our dogs gets into the refrigerator and stuff. So if somebody comes down the driveway, or if they see a deer, because I live in a rural area, they will bark. So just know that. All right. So they disclosed they were not grounded in reality. Wow, interesting, Rita. They disclosed referral process and things that I noticed. Awesome. Most often they would disclose sometimes something I noticed. Some of them disclosed, and some was because of what I noticed. And then she disclosed, but indirectly. So super helpful. So thank you so much for participating in the chat. So for those of you where the person disclosed, I just kind of want to hone in on that for a second. You're doing something right for sure for someone to tell you that they are, that they're struggling with a mental health disability. So I just want to lay that right up front, because there's lots of reasons for people not to tell you. So I'm going to kind of walk through some of those. So there's a lot of challenges to having mental health disabilities. Oh, okay, 1 second, everybody. I'm glad I warned you. Let me turn this off. Okay, that was a deer. They're very active in the snow. Okay, sorry about that. So a survivor, so it's really challenging for people with mental health disabilities to disclose. And a survivor may not ask for assistance or accommodations. You can't usually tell. Usually mental health disabilities are invisible. So for example, unless you were a clinician that worked with people with DID all the time, if I came into your program, you would never know I had DID. And DID is incredibly stigmatized. So I'd have to feel fairly safe within your program and with you as an advocate or as someone that I'm working with to tell you. So that the fact that someone can pass as not having a disability makes it also hard for them to disclose, because then people don't know, right? And they have to do something to let you know. So because you don't see it, you might not offer assistance or accommodations because you can't tell that the person has a disability. So then people with mental health disabilities have to disclose or ask for the accommodations. And one of the biggest reasons why people don't talk about the mental health challenges that they have is because of stigma. And so for example, I have dissociative identity disorder. I went through treatment 30 years ago. I, for a really long time, never told anyone I had it. Except for my partner or really, really close friends. And then slowly I started to let people know, because I realized that, well, one, because I went through a healing process, but two, because I needed to center my DID in my relationships and in my work and in my healthcare and other kind of critical aspects of my life in order to get through the things that I was going through with the kind of support that I needed. But DID is one of the most stigmatized disorders that there are. The ways in which they are portrayed on TV, in movies, in social media, it's really awful. And so you just see the stereotypes of mental health. So people with borderline personality disorder, bipolar, schizophrenia, all those things, it's really hard to let people know that you have it, because what you think as a person that has it is that people are going to think the ways in which they've seen it in movies and on TV. And that's stereotypical, not typical. So what you see is the worst aspects of it. You don't see portrayals in our in our movies and TV and social media of normal people living normal lives with these different mental health disabilities. So that's a really big part of the stigma. But then it's, if they have told people in the past their experience of disclosing their mental health, well, if it's been negative, it's really hard to then trust people again. So, and then there's all kinds of preconceived notions about people with mental health disabilities from service providers and advocates. So if there's somebody, like, for example, if you're doing a training, which I've done lots and lots of trainings around the country, you do a training and you start talking about different aspects of disability, mental health challenges and disabilities. Oftentimes there's people in the audience that have those, but they're managed. And but the things that other people say about them and about survivors who have them, you can't unhear that, right? And so it can, and like law enforcement, prosecution, courts, those folks have even less information about this, and you hear the things that they say. So then it makes it even harder to disclose, to share. And the reason I do it is because I move through the world as if I'm one, and I kind of want to destigmatize mental health disabilities, and in particular, destigmatize DID. The other thing is that survivors will lose credibility when people find out that they have a mental health disability. So all of a sudden, even though your disability is invisible, people start doubting you, people start second guessing you, and even talking to other people about you in front of you. And that can be awful. So, and then there's also this piece around disability, mental health disabilities, which can be really challenging. So if the people who caused harm to them have known about the disability that they have, either they have exploited it by doing gaslighting types of behaviors, meaning they will do things different from, like, they'll do and say things and then pretend that those didn't happen. So to make someone feel like their disability is worse than it really is. Or they will threaten people that they're going to disclose that their disability. So all these things are really scary for people. It keeps people very quiet about what they're struggling with. And then oftentimes people with disabilities will be, their knowledge, the things that they've seen or heard will be discounted because of that. I did a webinar recently with a couple folks who also have disabilities. And once one person said, it was on human trafficking, and one person said that people will not disclose, they will not reach out for help around human trafficking for fear that they will lose their independence, that they will be discredited and re-victimized by the system. So sometimes the actual trafficking itself is less scary than the system response to them. And that's usually in large part because they've had really bad responses before. A lot of people with mental health disabilities have faced forced institutionalization by family members who just didn't know what to do about it. And it's really, really harmful. So those previous negative experiences have made it really hard for survivors to disclose their mental health disabilities. They face attitudinal barriers, stigma, verbal and emotional abuse. They've received unequal treatment, and they've been excluded or otherwise discriminated against. So if you think about like how those previous negative experiences play out, you have a huge, like, what's the word I'm looking for? You have a huge challenge to try to help people feel comfortable with you. So you kind of have to go beyond what you would do normally to get people to trust you, to feel safe. And that's key, is if you are transparent and you're able to build trust with survivors, then survivors are more likely to tell you what's going on. Okay. So there's other negative consequences. Survivors with mental health disabilities may also fear other negative consequences about disclosing, including losing their employment, losing their housing, losing custody of their kids, or having CPS involvement, and then unwanted psychiatric services, forced medication, and then also if they're at all in a civil legal or criminal legal process, the impact of being able, of their credibility, of being able to go through the process, of not being discredited. So all these factors build into not sharing and a lot of shame about what your brain is like, your neurodivergence. Okay, so I have another question for you. Have you seen survivors with mental health disabilities disclose this disability? Okay, so a lot of you have, right? Did it impact your perceptions of them? So yes or no, and if yes, how? And I'm not saying that it's all negative. So I'll give you a few seconds, a few minutes to enter into the chat. And so really kind of be reflective. This is totally well, I'll just say for me, this is an opportunity to learn from you and hopefully for you to learn from me and from each other. So be reflective about kind of whether it did change. Okay, so oftentimes it helps put their behaviors and trauma response into context, helps me know how to support them better. Exactly. And I know for me, like the people that I've told in my life have felt closer to me, because it's a vulnerable thing to share. Okay, yes, and sometimes mainly that I needed to be aware of how their mental illness may be impacted by their current trauma or vice versa. Exactly. It helps you understand them more. Yes, but in a manner to not exclude them in any way. Awesome. Yeah. So I'll just say, I do a lot of peer support for people with DID, and I have DID obviously, and I still sometimes, when someone tells me they have DID, I do sometimes kind of watch them a little bit more. I do kind of like, there's just this little thing in me to just be cautious, to make sure like that I know how they're doing, what they're doing. And I do that with other diagnoses as well. And part of it is because I know mental health so well without being a clinician. And another part of it is just a little bit of fear. Like, I don't know how their mental health situation is going to show up. So, and I'm just kind of like, that's totally fine. All those things are totally fine. So Shelby says, I've seen survivors with mental health disabilities disclose a disability. This did not impact my perceptions of them. As a survivor myself with mental health diagnosis, I know firsthand it is needed, crucial information. Yep, awesome. Thanks, Shelby. And thanks for saying, about that you're a survivor and a mental health diagnosis. That's, yeah, thank you. Awesome. Okay, so it's just good to be, oh, thank you, Maria. So Maria identifies with my experiences of kind of how I think about when someone discloses to me. And it's just important to just kind of check in with yourself. Are there some diagnoses that are a little kind of like make you wonder? Like, I don't worry so much about people that have, just really honestly, I don't worry too much about people who tell me they have anxiety or depression. I do pay more attention when someone has DID because I want to kind of see how it shows up. Also, in large part, because also I have to figure out how it's going to bump into my DID. And then I do worry and just pay attention a little bit, people who have bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. And I try really hard not to treat people differently. I probably kind of err on the other side of it, of trying to be more accepting, more engaging. but I do watch it because I want to know how their stuff is going to bump into my stuff, just really honestly. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. And also it's important to know if you do that, because people are going to feel it. So I can tell when people say to me, oh no, it doesn't, it doesn't matter to me, or it doesn't, I can tell when someone's, might not be completely comfortable. And I bet the people who have told me have felt the same way about me, that I'm not completely comfortable. Okay, so complexities for advocates and service providers. I am more alert, sensitive, because I do not specialize in this population of folks. In other words, out of a lack of my own experience. Okay, good to know, Maria. Thank you. Okay, so one thing I wanna tell you, just like, and I'll say it a couple times during this. It doesn't matter, because if your work is as an advocate, it doesn't matter whether you're skilled or not if you work a certain way. And that's basically being trauma informed, because it's a universal thing that helps people with mental health disabilities. Okay, so all right, so let's talk about kind of what the complexities are. So, and I'd be curious to see if any of these have come up. So feel free to kind of enter into the chat some of the behaviors that you might have seen. So you might encounter behaviors from survivors with mental health disabilities that are difficult to understand or are unfamiliar, such as talking all the time. I always find myself in that one, usually because I'm doing a webinar. Being unable to remember what you talked about, people that are really withdrawn, or that don't seem to be paying attention, or people that are frustrated, easily frustrated and short-tempered. People that are not following through with the things that you've talked about, or people that have a lot of tension with other survivors. Also, some other behaviors that you might see is difficulties with planning and organizing themselves. You may also see a lot of limitations in stamina and fatigue, including sleeping a lot or staying awake overnight regularly, people having a hard time sleeping, difficulties tolerating stress, meaning they can't really, like, they go to this place of frustration or overwhelm with the slightest of stressful situations. They might be erratic or inconsistent behavior. And it's vital that you develop strategies to overcome these challenging behaviors, to work with survivors to provide healing services and justice. So as you think about the behaviors you've seen, I want you to kind of just notice the behaviors and then have strategies for them, so that you can be like, oh, okay, this is what I do in this situation. And so there's a couple things to remember. And this is the thing that, like, people kind of struggle with. So when I've done this presentation and I've worked with people around mental health disabilities, or in specifically DID, the key is to remember that people with mental health disabilities are more likely to be victimized than they are to be violent. The abuse, its aftermath, and trauma can exacerbate a mental health disability. So it'll, like what we saw with the statistics early on, it can make things worse. It can cause what I like to say is a flare up. So if someone has I can't think of the name of it. If they have a physical ailment, how abuse can cause a flare up of that. It's the same with a mental health disability. And then also remember that behavior is not always a choice. It can it can be part of that person's disability. So people can learn to manage their behaviors, but sometimes there'll be things about their disability that they're not able to do. So for example, with DID, someone could switch without having a lot of control. They forget, they present differently. There might be a little bit harder to work with. That's something that they are not able to control until they've had either things calm down or till they go through a process of healing. So the key here is to adapt. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. So then, does the diagnosis matter? And these are some of the labels that we put on people: person's ADD or ADHD, bipolar, dissociative identity disorder, PTSD, schizophrenia, major depressive disorder, borderline personality, anxiety. So these are all things that we will say about someone, that we will think about someone. This is human nature that we will do this. But what we're going to go through is unless you are a clinician, the diagnosis does not make a big difference. It's only if you're a clinician that the diagnosis will make a big difference. If someone wants to tell you they have DID and they want you to know that, that's great. But the way that you work with them is going to be the same. So really, honestly, the diagnosis doesn't matter, because for your purposes as an advocate, what helps is usually helpful regardless of the diagnosis. And so if you focus on the needs of a person and not their diagnosis, then, because everyone's going to show up differently, like my DID is going to show up differently than someone else's DID. So if you just think, oh, she had DID and this is the way she showed up, and this next person comes in, well, they have DID, they're probably going to show up the way Olga showed up. It's not the way it works. So the mental health disabilities can be really different based on that person. So that's why having the diagnosis isn't really very relevant. It might help to understand that someone has a disability, help you better understand how to work with them, because you can tell they've got these mental health challenges or disability, but otherwise it's really not. Okay, so I'm going to walk through what helps. And is everybody okay so far? Can I just do, okay, so I see people nodding. Thank you. Thanks, Jessica. Thanks, Maria. I really appreciate that. Cannot tell you enough. Okay, cool. Because I know it's hard to let go of the fact that we think we need to know their diagnoses. All right, so let's talk about what helps. This is not going to surprise you, and it's going to validate a lot of what you do. So, and you want to be able to create an accessible space. And that's the most important thing. So, and this is kind of I'm hoping that this makes sense. People around the country in domestic violence, sexual assault, and other types of intimate partner services, when a lot of people, when they think about creating accessible spaces for people with disabilities, they think of physically accessible, and that's really important. But it's more common that it's the attitudes of the program, of different advocates, of law enforcement, prosecution, child welfare, all the different system responders. It's the attitudes that actually make a huge difference. So in order to create an accessible space, you have to address physical safety and emotional safety. Okay, so physical safety is the physical environment and who has access to that survivor and who has access to that survivor's information. And then how are survivors treated in your program by the other people in the program and by the other survivors, because that's a safety issue as well. And then to recognize that physical safety and emotional safety are intertwined. If there is physical safety, meaning that no one can get to that survivor physically, but you don't have emotional safety, it's not going to feel physically safe to a person with a mental health disability. Okay. And so it's very, very intertwined. And so a lot of your effort is going to be spent on creating emotional safety. So you do that by building rapport. You do that by being patient, building trust, and being transparent. Remember that people have been telling that survivor that they have been a problem or that they have been hard forever, whether they say it or act like it. Meaning that, so someone like me that has DID, there are challenges to being in my life. And I have been shown and told in so many ways how hard I am because I can't do this, or because I don't want to do this, or because I need this. Like I have friends that are very, very spontaneous. I have like people in my life that wish that I could be more flexible, that wish I could be more responsive. And so that is going through the heads of everybody who comes in and has a physical, has a mental health disability. They carry with them their experiences of people not understanding them, of people making them the problem. So when you're trying to be patient and you're trying to be transparent and to build trust, that factors in. So remember that you're dealing with someone who has been blamed for their mental health disability forever. So they're going to see and hear things in that vein. That's why being transparent is so important. So in order to create emotional safety, you want to plan for more time. You want to keep things simple. This is something that I've learned a lot I work for the Vera Institute of Justice, and I facilitate a BIPOC group of people with disabilities. And for people who have developmental disabilities and mental health disabilities, I have learned to try to keep things really simple, meaning don't try. So sometimes I can be very convoluted in the things that I say. And I'm reminded all the time how that is hard for people with disabilities, with mental health disabilities. And it's funny because I have a mental health disability and I would hate it if someone talked to me the way sometimes I talk. I would find it really hard. There are still times that I forget to keep things simple, to like one sentence is this, one meeting is about this, or the first part of the meeting is about this one thing, the second part of meeting is about this other thing. Keep it simple. Try to limit chaos to the extent possible. Super, super helpful. And by chaos, I mean noise, stimulation, unpredictability around that person. And you can't obviously control everything around, but if you're working with someone and the area that you're working with has a lot going on, try to find a quieter place. If your offices, for example, have things up stacked really high, have a lot of bright colors around, try to find a different place to work with them. And the more people around, the more chaos there can be. The other thing is to repeat things as often as needed. And this is good for everyone. And then provide them information in different modes of learning. Don't just give people things in writing. Also, things that are written are often not written at the level that everyone can understand. So if it's possible to give people drawings of what's going on, or what I like to call fotonovelas, meaning that it doesn't matter your literacy level, doesn't matter whether you speak English or not, you can follow the drawings, which is like, if you've ever been on a plane, when you open up that little thing that shows you what to do in an emergency, there are drawings in there because they want to make sure that everybody understands what you're supposed to do in an emergency on a plane. So think about creating things like that so that people don't have to work so hard to try to understand your work with them, what they're doing. You can also develop really short videos that can help people understand their work with you, remember what they're supposed to do. So again, those different modes of learning are really important when you're working with someone. So walk people through it, use videos, provide information in writing, but again, not too high level of writing, or use drawings or fotonovelas. Or I think they call them graphic novels as well, which are really cool, by the way. They take a lot of work, but they're really cool. Other things that you can do to help. You can help create a checklist for people. This is super helpful. I was working with a program in southern Minnesota, and they had somebody that they were working with who has DID and also has some other disabilities. And one of the things that we kind of figured out was that because she didn't have a lot of healing and she had a lot of switching and not sharing information from one part to the other, what they created was a series of notebooks where each part would write what they need the next part to know. And so that way, when they switched, they had this practice of going to the notebook and getting information. It's really, really clever. Provide things in writing or drawn instructions, provide reminders for people. So if you're doing safety planning with someone and they might not be able to retain everything that you've planned with them, to have like an opportunity for them to text you or to go to a specific thing for the next steps. Just like, you have to kind of think differently and work differently when you're working with people with mental health disabilities. Our normal boundaries aren't always going to be as helpful. So being able to like do these 2 steps and then let me know, and then I'll give you information around the next ones, or here's where you can put this. And when you've done these 2 things, then remember to go to this notebook or this planner or whatever it is. The other thing is, if you're working in a space where you can't control your atmosphere, your surroundings, and if the noise is too distracting, too chaotic for that person, you can provide noise canceling headsets. That really helps a lot. Or having those little sound machines. And actually a lot of apps now, a lot of phones have apps nowadays where you can download kind of different sounds that are very calming. I have the kind that therapists use, because sometimes my partner is a dog trainer. Sometimes she'll have dog training classes out in our yard, and I close all the blinds and I turn on the sound machine so my dog doesn't hear it as well. They're really awesome. And then suggest the use of calendars or planners for people. This is all ways in which that you can help people kind of think through how to do the things that you're working with them on, and have like a way of organizing themselves, a way of thinking about that work. Okay, be structured. So one of the best things, regardless of what the disability is, and for sure for trauma-related issues, is to make things as predictable as possible. The more that someone knows what to expect, the more they're going to be able to do it. The less that they know about what to expect, the more anxiety they're going to feel, the harder it's going to be to get through it. So if you can break things down and make it really predictable, and what I would do is talk to someone who doesn't really know your job well, or the thing that you do with survivors. Talk to someone and explain to them how they're going to do it. And if there's any gaps, because if you do this with the other advocates that you work with, they know what you do, so they're going to fill in the gaps. But if you can kind of break it all down, then you're more likely to explain it to the survivor in a way that's going to be helpful to them. So it'll be like, so let's say you're helping someone like get to court for their court hearing. So you can talk to them about how they're going to get there. What time are they going to leave? Are they going to drive? Are they going to take a bus? Are they going to take an Uber or a Lyft? Are they going to have a friend take them? Is this something that you can do where you pick them up? Like, you know, all these different kind of, then where are they going to enter the courthouse? Is there going to be a metal detector? What do they have to put through the metal detector? Who else is in that area of the courthouse? Like all the people that come in, that's where everybody comes in, or there are several different entrances. Which one's going to be the easiest for them? How many elevators are there? Is there a possibility of using the stairs? Which courtroom are they going to need to go to? How do they get to that courtroom? Which judge is going to be there? What's that judge like? Where are they going to sit to wait before their hearing? All those different pieces need to be worked out. And quite honestly, I would walk them through it before they have to do it. So they know exactly what to do. And I would do that with them, unless your program doesn't allow you to do that kind of, some programs are really strongly focused on boundaries and what you can do with a survivor. I actually think that survivors with mental health disabilities, you may need to do more accompaniment when they're struggling, and then from that point they can do more on their own. So by helping survivors to know what to expect, you are helping them to be able to do it. The other thing, and this is what works for me, this is a huge thing for me, is creating routines. So creating a routine for helping the survivor create a routine for themselves ensures that they're going to be able to do the things that they need to do. And if you create a routine with the survivor in your work, then that survivor is going to get more and more comfortable with your work together, and you will get to it faster. So let me kind of tell you a little bit about what I mean by this. No matter how much healing I've done, when I meet someone new and I work with someone new, I am more observant than I am engaged. So I will be quiet, I will watch, I will get a lay of the land. I will try really hard not to stand out. And then once I feel comfortable, I might then start engaging, depending on how the interactions go. And so, but in order to engage in the beginning, I'm going to do more chatting, like getting a sense of you, than I will getting into the work. And once I have a sense of you, then I'm going to get into the work that we're doing together. And that first time I might chat the whole time. Or I might chat until we have 5 minutes left. Or, but if you do the same thing over and over again, like you meet the person in a similar place, you offer them like a glass of water or a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, you sit down in the same place, you ask them how they're doing. If you go through that over and over and over again, the same way, that person will become comfortable faster because of the routine. So they'll also get comfortable because they're getting to know you, but you can't always tell how their disability shows up. If there's something different about the space that they're working with you, that may then push them back to withdrawing. But if you have this routine, then the routine in and of itself will create comfort for that person and make it easier for them. So this is what I mean by structure. So keeping things predictable, helping people know what to expect, creating routines for your work, and then helping the survivor create routines for their life. So I do the same thing pretty much every day. I mean, especially since COVID. I get up in the morning, I let the dogs out, I feed them, I get a cup of coffee, I go back upstairs, I get ready for my day. I do that every morning. It feels like the same thing over and over again. And when I'm depressed, and because, with a history of trauma, to have DID, I also struggle with depression and anxiety. I'm kind of like a mess, but I'm a really good mess. But if I'm feeling, if my depression is really kicked up, I still get up. I still let the dogs out. I still feed them. I still get a cup of coffee and I go upstairs. I might do it a little slower. I might sleep in a little bit more, but I still do that because it's my routine. It is harder to not do it than it is to do it. So routines are really, really helpful for people. Survivors with mental health disabilities often experience decreased stamina or fatigue. So this is where I just finished talking about how I want you to be structured, but within that structure, I want you to be flexible. So acknowledging the fact that someone might be struggling with stamina or fatigue is really helpful for people, and doing that in a very non-judgmental way, saying this is really common for people who've experienced violence, is really common for people that have different trauma-related issues, or if they've disclosed to you, it's really common for people that have mental health disabilities. So let's create a flexible schedule that fits what your level of stamina or fatigue. Be flexible. If you're in a shelter, for example, be flexible with the sleeping arrangements. There's so much about domestic violence shelters that are really hard for people with mental health disabilities, and especially people who have trauma-related trauma histories and trauma-related disabilities. So being flexible about where people sleep, when they sleep, is really huge. Also, making sure that you're taking periodic breaks. Your level of attention, your level of stamina is not what you should be basing your meetings on or your work with survivors on. It should be on theirs. I was doing a webinar not too long ago, and I was facilitating the webinar with 2 people with disabilities. And one of the people with disabilities, and this person is amazing. They've written like 2 or 3 books and all kinds of articles, and they're really radical and really very, very cool. And the first thing they said at the very beginning of the webinar is, we're going to take a 10-minute break in the middle of the webinar, right? And it didn't even occur to me that we should be taking a 10-minute break in the middle of the webinar, because I just never do that. And so, but we did. We took a 10-minute break in the middle of the webinar. And then when we all came back, everybody was sharper. And I was thinking I should do that more often. But of course, I did not plan for that for us today. But that's kind of like that person letting me know. So I should be thinking about stuff like that, like how hard it is for the people who I'm presenting with. And just like planning breaks in the middle of it, because I've been doing webinars forever. It's, you know, I can do 90 minutes. That's not a big deal. But for other people, it might not be the same. So it's just a little example of kind of not centering yourself around what breaks are needed or how you're working with someone, but centering them. And so asking about breaks, should we take breaks? And then also, as you're working with people, break the tasks down. The easiest thing to happen when someone has mental health disabilities, when you're dealing with something new, is that you are easily overwhelmed. And if you break things down, you can make it much easier for people to do it, to think about it, to kind of move through their life a little bit more carefully. If the feeling of having too much to do, too many emotions tied to these things, because all of this work that people do with you is emotional labor, right? So if you could, as a routine, just break down the tasks that the survivor is doing with you. And what I mean by that is, let's say the survivor's got to write up, let's just pick an example. They have to write up a victim impact statement. So that's a lot of emotional labor. So to be able to like break that down for someone, okay, so let's say we meet and we'll just talk about what happened. And we'll talk about the things that happened early that day or around that day or whatever, like you'd like to talk about. We'll just take 10 or 15 minutes to talk about it. And then we'll take a break. And, you know, we can come back together later in the day and talk about it a little bit more. And then as you talk with me, you know, maybe then we can start writing it down, like just kind of like taking it and just breaking it down into little chunks. Because to think that you've got something to do, if you're looking at the whole thing, it might not seem hard to you for someone to do that, but it's overwhelming for people, especially people who are new to your work. So breaking things down is really easy. In fact, this is something I do routinely for people with DID that are dealing with memories of abuse, that it can feel overwhelming, like having a full day ahead of them, feeling really depressed, having suicidal ideation, and not feeling like they're going to be able to get through it. What I do is I say, all right, so let's break your day down. What feels manageable to you? Like at what point does the thought of getting through this amount of time become overwhelming? And I've done this for myself, and thinking about just getting through an hour felt like too much. So I would break things down into 5-minute increments. And I would just try to get to the 5 minutes. And then I would try to get to the next 5 minutes and then through the next 5 minutes. And that was huge for me to be able to do that. So breaking tasks down are really helpful. Then plan for triggers. And I'm sure that you're good at this, but just as a reminder, talk with survivors about the challenges that they experience. So they might not see them as triggers, and then a lot of them will. So when I say challenges they experience, I'm thinking when they get triggered. When do they happen? How do they come about? What helps them when that happens? And then how can you help? This is really great conversations to have. You may need to have it more than once, because some of the things that used to help might not help anymore. And also check in on whether what you're doing is actually helpful for them or not. Okay, learn about grounding techniques. This is super helpful. And so and I know you guys know this, but it helps me to just make sure that we're all on the same page. When someone gets triggered, they leave the here and now cognitively, and they're in something that was traumatic. And so when you're grounding someone, you are helping them come back to the here and now. And so it helps to soothe and calm a person who has been triggered to feel themselves in the here and now. So there's lots and lots of different grounding techniques you can use, like really seriously, lots. And it's mostly things that center around a person feeling themselves in their body or feeling themselves in the room. So you can ask them to identify 2 round things, 3 square things, 4 yellow things, things like that in the room. You can ask them if they can feel their feet on the floor, if they can feel their legs on the chair, they can feel their back against the chair. You can ask them to take a deep breath, hold it, then let it go. Can they feel themselves in that? The more that you can see them breathing as you're asking them to, the more they're coming back. So there's a lot of ways to help people get grounded. Practice some of these techniques beforehand, before you need it. And I would say practice them with family and friends that don't do this work, to make sure that you're doing it okay. If you can discuss it beforehand with survivors, that's great. If not, just go to common techniques like seeing, what are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you hearing in the room? What can you feel? Things like that are really helpful. And then one of the things that I do is, if you're working with a survivor for a little while, is to have them carry around a little grounding kit. And it can be really, really small stuff. It could be gum that they like, lip balm that they like, essential oils. I carry a little agate with me, little stones. I have pictures on my phone of our dogs, and that's always very grounding for me. So anything like that, and you can talk through with a survivor. This is a really helpful thing for people with mental health disabilities, is to learn how grounding can really be helpful for them and how they can do it for themselves. The other thing, I want to go back for a second to the issue around someone feeling overwhelmed. When you break down those tasks, what you're also doing is teaching people to do that for themselves. And also you're breaking down and allowing for choice, for decisions to be made. And when that happens too, people feel more empowered, taking over their own lives. And that's really, really helpful. Okay, so then I want you to ask questions about their needs. And again, I'm probably validating a lot of what you do already, but so ways in which you would ask these questions are, is there anything we can do to help you while you are here? If they disclose about their mental health disabilities, then help them figure out whether they need to tell other people about their mental health disabilities. And this is completely up to them. And here's where I feel like it might be an important discussion to have. If they are in a criminal legal or a civil legal system, and they have a disability that a prosecutor may need to know if they're testifying, then that's a conversation to have. So for example, if I have come to you and I've told you I have DID, and you know that that means that I don't always have access to what has happened to me, that I might switch from one part to the other, and there might be no information shared from one part to the other. That's the kind of conversation you might want to have, you know, who else knows that you have DID, and do you think, this is not the way I would say it, by the way, but I just kind of want to get the thought out. Do you think that the prosecutor's office should know that you have DID? So the conversation should be around, okay, thank you so much for letting me know that you have DID. Can you tell me how this affects you and why it is that you felt like I should know this? And then having a conversation with them about how it affects them. And then who else in your life knows this about you? Because it might be something that the person who caused them harm knows, that then you don't, if they're in a criminal legal process or a civil legal process, it's not the kind of thing that the attorney that they're working with should be surprised about. So having just a conversation about, do you think you want to share that with them? And then if no, it's no, obviously. Okay. But this is like, this is a bit of a, really one of the only times that knowing what their diagnosis is and having a conversation with them about if they want to share that with others and how you can help them do that. If they, let's say it's not a legal situation at all, it's that they have grown in their work with you and they realize how much better it is to let people know what they're struggling with. So is there any support that you can give them as they're letting people know about their diagnosis? Other ways that you can talk about some of the issues that they might be challenged with is, for example, I talked about limiting chaos. So one way you can talk about that with folks is it can get noisy and busy around here. If you think that will be a problem for you, what can we do to help? These are just really good ways of talking about it that's open-ended for folks, that makes it really much easier. If you have a medication policy in your program, sharing that with them ahead of time and then having a discussion about how that feels, whether that's going to be a problem for them, talking about any concerns that they might have. I actually I get why people have medication policies. Being a lawyer, I get that, but I struggle with people not having access to their own medications. That would feel really hard for me. And then also, you want to avoid anything that makes someone feel trapped, because that kicks up a lot of disabilities, a lot of mental health challenges that people have. So you want to kind of talk through with them, taking their medication away from them and holding them might feel like they're trapped, meaning that they might not be able to have access to their medication when they need it. So you want to make sure that if you have a medication policy that you talk it through, and that and if it's that you hold medications, you may need to have some options for how people can have access to their medications without having to go through someone. Because that's tricky. So then the other thing is around medications is to talk about any side effects that people might have to it. So just so you know what you're seeing. Okay. And then again, other questions about needs. Sometimes we give you a lot of information. Let us know if we're giving you too much. So this is again about overwhelming people. We can have a pretty tight schedule of activities here. If you think that maintaining the schedule will be a problem, can you let us know how, and we can, figure out how we can help. That's around stamina and fatigue. I know at this point you may not be aware of things you may need. I will make sure to check in on you throughout your stay, but remember you can reach out to any of us and ask us for assistance, but then don't expect them to. Just keep checking back in. All right. So, and questions. So I'm curious if, so you probably thought you were gonna ask the questions, but now I have questions for you. So I'm curious if any of these things, like, does this validate what you do, or is this new to you? So I'd love to hear in the chat, or maybe some of both. Or, let's see, how much time do we have? Oh yeah, we have about 15 minutes left. Or you can also unmute yourself and tell us. Oh, good. Thanks, Rita. So it validates. Awesome.
And Olga, I would love, I don't know if there's any time for conversation. I think one of the things, I have two other colleagues from my agency on the call, which is so exciting.
Oh, awesome.
I think part of why we're here is we're in Asheville, North Carolina. And so it's a beautiful place, but we're having a really, really significant housing crisis, much like other communities, especially communities that have high tourism. And it's exacerbating the mental health crises that we would already have. And so this was all great information, I think, validating a lot of our framework. One of the things we're running into is how to provide crisis advocacy in a meaningful way when we're having folks that are like in such mental health crises that maybe, it's complex PTSD, maybe there's another mental health diagnosis and they're in active crisis. So I don't know if there's time or space to have that conversation, but that's definitely one of the things that brought me to this webinar.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of these tips are still going to work for that. So when someone's in crisis, your focus is safety and stability. So that's what you want to create for them. Help them to create as well. Okay. So limiting chaos, keeping things calm, keeping things simple, and then trying to, again, like address what it is that's creating the crisis. For a lot of people right now, I'm guessing it's a lack of affordable housing. So that piece of it I can't help you with, sadly. But in the meantime, the crisis of not being able to afford a place to live is overwhelming. Break it down. And then try to figure out where you have resources for that and point that direction, offering to things with them, because all that is going to require a lot of work. Do they need relocation help? Connecting them to people, but the key right up front is safety and stability. What has brought them in to see you? And that's the crisis in front of you. And you break everything down because everything is going to feel overwhelming. So, and you're talking about basically very basic needs. So that's where you're going. You have to address the basic needs before you can help with anything else. because they're not going to be able to see it or do it.
Right.
So what stands in the way between, aside from money, what stands in the way between the crisis they're in right now and finding affordable housing?
I
And
think
so
that,
then, go
right.
ahead.
And I think actually this is a really helpful conversation, because I think what's been at NC CASA I've also been in conversation with, and I think what's clarifying to me is, of course, we're experiencing this crisis where we don't even have emergency shelters that folks can get into, and we're having freezing temperatures. Like, I think
Yeah.
actually is where I keep landing. Like, it would be bizarre if we weren't experiencing this.
Right.
And like, we have to like address that before we can hope to work with somebody and help stabilize somebody.
Right.
Okay.
So are there places in other parts? I've been to Asheville. It's really
We're
beautiful.
the
And I know everybody's,
largest, yeah, we're the largest city in Western North Carolina. So it's a challenge for sure.
yeah.
And I know you're in a rural area too, so you can
Yeah,
probably relate some of that.
I can totally relate. And we're also starting to see that as well. It's not anywhere near as beautiful as Asheville, but the numbers of people that were not able to stay in housing, the numbers of people who, whose relationships devolved during the pandemic. I mean, there's just so much. So here's the other piece of it, is trying to think creatively around housing. I know that, well, I'm curious whether your city is looking at affordable housing as an issue, and looking at the
Conversation.
looking at the American Relief Act as sources for dealing with affordable housing.
Yeah, lots of conversations, several hotels bought, and it's barely scratching the surface, but we're in good company. I know, unfortunately.
Yeah,
So I think, yeah, it's just
really
helping me
bad.
reframe. And
Yeah,
also, how do we lean on other community partners to help with this too?
right.
Yes,
Yeah,
we are tangentially a part of the COC, and as we build capacity, we're planning to like try to get further into that table.
cool.
Yeah. Anytime you want to talk about housing, you're more than welcome to contact me. And I've done a couple webinars about like the American, is it
Rescue
American?
plan.
Yeah,
That's
thank
what
you.
it is.
Yeah.
It's American Rescue Plan. I knew there was something wrong with what I said.
I was like, have I been wrong? Yeah, so there's a lot of fun with that, and like for housing and things like that from the Department of the Treasury, but the way that it's been distributed has been, I think, really confusing, and also not every state distributes it the same way. So like, I think North Carolina actually has some more barriers that other states don't have when it comes to accessing that funding. But I mean, for anyone on the call, if you are also struggling with a lot of survivors who, well, we know across the board, people are struggling with survivors not having housing, and especially sexual assault, because I know a lot of shelters kind of have, the rule that they'll only take people who are in imminent danger. And so for sexual assault survivors, that can be tricky, which is something that I'm really passionate about changing, and, thinking through like, well, what does imminent danger actually mean? And so something to think about, I think, for everybody. But if you have any questions about housing, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk more about that. And I can definitely at least point you in the direction of some statewide and national resources. I mean, I think we're both in a really dark time when it comes to housing and houselessness, but we're also in a really lucrative time in that there's a lot of funding out there right now, but the way that we understand how it is working is not clear. So it's like a double-edged sword, but feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you both.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know it's really hard. I'm Wisconsin is distributing money differently. Out here, what they're doing is is kind of creating like trailer parks, for lack of a better word, because there's lots of space in rural areas, but that just barely really addresses the need. Plus, then people don't have cars. How are they going to get to where they're going? This is even worse than, at least in Asheville. Asheville's more populated. But yeah, I totally hear you. Okay, other questions or thoughts? Or so whenever you're dealing with someone who has a mental health disability that's in crisis, the first thing you focus on is safety and stability. So addressing the issue that brought them in, helping them, breaking it down, helping it to feel manageable, even though it might just be huge. And some of that might be relocation.
I don't know if other folks
Sorry.
have questions or things that they want to share, but two things that I would share from my experience, both working at a rape crisis center and working with survivors with mental health issues, as well as what I'm seeing at the coalition level. The first is, you know, Olga talked about this, but just to reinforce how important it is to, you know, not be afraid to repeat yourself, because there are a lot of survivors who I've talked to recently who have contacted their local program and can't remember anything they talked about, and they're kind of confused. And so I think sometimes we think those survivors, and you know, this isn't to shame anybody, we all do it, we're humans. But you know, sometimes we may think like, oh, well, that person's just like probably using drugs, or like, you know, we make all these assumptions about why they can't remember, but sometimes it really is because trauma, or because of their mental health disability. And even if they are using substances, maybe that's just a coping mechanism. And so we still, you know, if we, thanks, Maria, sorry. But yeah, so I think just kind of reinforcing that it's okay to repeat ourselves. It's okay to check in and say, hey, do you want me to repeat this? Or do you want me to write this down for you? So just reinforcing that piece, because it has come up recently. And then the other thing is, sometimes on that same note, it can be difficult if we have survivors who someone had mentioned in the chat, like they're not grounded in reality. And sometimes that can be a struggle for advocates, because we want to help, but maybe they're not present. And I think that's another situation where we often are kind of like maybe less likely to believe them, or more likely to say, oh, well, we just need to send you to the psychiatric hospital. And so I would just, you know, encourage folks to remember that if they're not grounded in them, and like that's the place we need to work from. So just kind of wanted to lift those heard from survivors around the state.
And it's a really good point, Leah, and it's one that so I always ask, so what's the harm in what the survivor is doing? Because sometimes we get caught up in what we're doing and what we're supposed to do, and don't take a step back and be like, so why is this a problem? And if you could just kind of like, what's the harm in this? Then adapt and accommodate, because sometimes it's confusion because of everything that's going on, plus their mental health disability. And they just might need a little stabilizing in the program that they're in, to feel safe, to feel like outside of like a bunch of chaos and stuff, to be able to get some sleep, to be able to eat something, to be able to drink water or whatever. And then things calm down. And but if you react to this is a problem, and then you got to go to this hospital, or you got to go to this clinic or whatever, you've lost them. and they're not going to come back to you because they're not going to trust you unless they absolutely have to. And I've been in that situation where I just get confused sometimes because there's just too much going on for me. So it's not it's not unrealistic to see. So just kind of like ask yourself, like when you're in this situation and you're caught up in it, let me be the little voice in the back of your head that says, what's the harm in this? Like, is there any? And can we just adapt and give her a little bit of space, or him or them? So I have lots of little questions that I have in the back of my head. Sorry, that was a DID joke. It's a bad one.
Well, it is 1:30, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially I'm sure a lot of people have some things they're trying to finish up before the end of the week and hopefully some rest.
Yes.
So, Olga, is it okay with you if we send out your slides?
Yeah, totally. And I just put my email in the chat, but it's also on my slides. But yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Feel
great.
free to send those out.
Perfect. Well, this has been recorded. So if you need to come back and watch it, we can. And I will send out the slides to everyone who participated today. And thank you so much for being here with us. We have more webinars coming in the new year, so be on the lookout. And I hope everyone enjoys a lot of rest in the coming weeks. You deserve it.
Yeah. I hope that the weather is as you want it. I'm not going to say warm or anything. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.